Fatigue came on, filled her and spread over her body in a pleasant, warm wave. Such languid relaxation usually came over Valia after a job well done. At first there was tension, concentrated attention and fast work of thought. Then gradually the feeling of successful completion of the case was gradually germinating from the shell of efforts, and finally the deal was signed, the clients put their marks on the beautiful letterhead of the firm. Then came the euphoria, from the fact that you were able, coped, found the right words, persuaded, proved, convinced, did not succumb to the voice that whispered about failure. Now you can go home, having bought something to eat on the way. You can lie on the sofa, turning on your favorite TV show, and bury your fingers in the thick, warm fur of Romance, Valia's cat. He rumbled contentedly, squinting his green, sly eyes, and stretched out next to his mistress on the soft, plush plaid. The euphoria burned away. Fatigue remained. Valia went to sleep. The woman had not seen dreams for a long time. Lying down on the pillow, Valia instantly closed her eyes and fell into blackness. Her brain was frozen, sunk in the bottomless nothingness, her face smoothed out, her palms hid under her cheek. Then Valia became beautiful. Without cosmetics, creams and other tricks, she turned into herself, as Romance remembered her on the day of their acquaintance. That day the car crept carefully through the wet alleys, throttle brake, throttle again, jerk, stop again. Then Valentina was still just learning to drive, afraid of speed, frightened to look at the huge buses passing by and huddled on the pavement, booed by the honks of rushing drivers. She saw Romans at once. He was floundering in a ditch. His fur was piled up and frozen with a hard crust of road mud. His ears were pressed to his head. His paws were frantically beating on the slippery ground, trying in vain to claw at the edge of the ditch and pull his master up. Valia parked up, switching on the emergency brake, and ran up to the kitten. And now her bright spring-style smart coat is covered with mud, and her scarf covers the weakly meowing creature on the back seat of the car in its warm captivity. Nothing. Nothing. Bear with me, baby. Now we'll come home. I'll wash you, eat, and you'll feel better right away. Valia knew that for sure. You need to come home, put the kettle on the cooker, then go to the shower, close your eyes, and feel with every cell of your body as the fuss drips off you, leaving only peace. And then suddenly remember that the kettle on the cooker has long been whistling, shrill and arrogant. Jump out of the bathroom and, pulling on a dressing gown, soft, bake, mums, run, losing slippers, to the kitchen. But the kitten, as it turned out, did not like bathing. For a long time Valia persuaded him to put his skinny belly under a warm stream of water. The pet squeaked unhappily, glittering his eyes. Romance was tired, and Valia was tired too. Both were sitting in the kitchen, Valia with coffee in a heavy clay cup with a ship, Romance with a saucer of food that the new mistress had bought on the way. He was not used to it. All the women at the sight of him would cringe, pity, pine and melt into the gentle creatures they feared to be in ordinary life. Already 8 times the green-eyed cat changed owners, 8 times came to the place where he was needed most of all. Valia was the 9th, the last, and from this even more dear. Romance will try his best to make sure that everything ends well. He didn't become Romance right away. First Valia christened him Vaska, then Pushka, but the names didn't stick. The cat refused to respond to them, unhappily beat his paw and snorted. When will you understand, dear woman, that last I want a noble sound, serious name? He sighed, obediently playing with the ribbon in Valia's hand. Valia did not understand, but saw the eyes staring at her, blinked, unable to withstand this piercing gaze, turned away, as if embarrassed. The name was born accidentally, on the day when Valia forgot her ticket to the concert hall on the nightstand. She was supposed to go with a friend to the evening of Romance. As always, she was late at work. The evening went wrong. Only the cat sat philosophically on a stool and looked at the mistress running around the flat. And now she had already put on her coat. The strap of her purse hung on her shoulder, the front door slammed, and the ticket remained lying in the hallway. Come back. The cat squinted and stared intently at the door. Before it's too late, Come back." Valia stuck her hand in the compartment of her purse, passport, money, keys. Everything was in place. "The ticket," she moaned. Running up the stairs, she opened the door. The cat sat in the hallway and meowed, as if humming something. The ticket for the evening of romance jumped into her pocket, and Valia squatted down and patted the pet on the head. "Oh, you're my caretaker," smiled the woman. "That's it. You'll be my romance. I ran. Wait." This mistress was surprisingly strongly liked romance. All the other 8 women who had gone before her didn't really fit into the pet's heart. No, of course, they took care of him, loved him as best they could, but with none of them the cat did not feel at home. Work. That's what they were for him. Valia is different. Seemingly ordinary, a little rambling, nervously biting her nails when the boss calls, sitting in front of the TV watching old films over and over again. Romance sat next to her and watched her face. It reflected everything that the heroine felt on the screen, rejoiced, suffered, surprised, and angrily raised eyebrows. It was interesting, funny, and a little strange, but Romance was satisfied. She also liked to put caramels in her coffee. She'd throw them in and wait for the thick mass to heat up and become as pliable as plasticine, and then she would scoop out a candy with a spoon and slowly eat it. It was not atypical of all the women who had fed the cat before, but everyone has their quirks, and Romance liked this one. His delicate nose caught behind the light aroma of caramel, something homely, childish, something that Valia would never tell him about, but that so transformed her sad, wiped by care's face. So Valia did not dream. But suddenly, Romance began to lie down next to her when her mistress fell asleep, rumbling quietly, squinting his sly eyes. Then dreams burst into the blackness, bright, juicy, like fruit glistening in the sun, like a rainbow, suddenly thrown over the rain-washed jungle, like a flock of exotic birds that suddenly flew up from the magnolia bush, and with a chirp flew to the neighboring trees. And Valia drank this picture, drank it to the end, to the ringing of the alarm clock, to the quiet meow of Romance, who licked the nose of his sleepy mistress and left the room because he was a very well-mannered cat. Their life would have gone on like that if Nikolai had not appeared in Valina's life. The man wanted to buy a house in the countryside, so he turned to the real estate firm where Valentina worked. The order promised to be profitable. The client wanted a palace in the village style, and Valia had to find him a dream cottage. "If you do well, I'll give you a raise," promised the boss. "Just be careful. Show all the best." The client was interested in a house on Riga. "Suggest it, take him there, discuss everything, and hurry up." Valia nodded. Of course, the increase in payment was a tempting incentive, and Nikolai himself was quite an interesting client, polite, gallant, intelligent. Romance learnt all this from Valentina herself when she was talking to her friend on the phone. The woman described the client in a special way, even a little tenderly, complained that none of the houses did not really fit Nikolai's needs, and she did not want to disappoint him. Romance wrinkled his nose. Here came what he called work. It came with some unsettling, vaguely disturbing scent wafting through the air of his and Valia's flat, with the crackling of electrical discharges from the thin tendrils. Romance sighed. So he didn't have long to live with Valia. It was a pity, but that was the way the world worked. His world. They quickly agreed on the inspection of the house. On Saturday, Nikolai promised to pick up Valentina and visit 1 or 2 places where stood newly built houses, tall, log, and languishing in their humming loneliness. Romance did not know what was to happen, but he was sure he must accompany his mistress on the journey. Some nonsense, Iakon, he thought, looking through the window at the rush of cars on the busy street. Neither the client nor Valia herself would agree to carry me along. What to do? He was calculating the options, and Valia still could not decide what to wear on the trip to please Nikolai. The 2 occupants of the quiet flat wandered from corner to corner, looking at each other confusedly. Romance? How can I do this? Valia was wearing something strange, like a blue cloud. It was like a tent dress, or an all-rounder for all occasions. The cat meowed unhappily. Okay. And this? Breeches and tight jumper made Valia look like a tennis player who had lost the general classification. Romance snorted. Well, what to wear then? Valia rummaged through the clothes on the hangers. Romance knew what she needed. Something comfortable, sporty, not restricting movement. Why? He didn't know why, but his feline instincts never let him down. He had to sit down in a corner, open his eyes wide and say everything to Vala. Thoughts to thoughts, so that she heard the inner voice and did everything as it was necessary. And now I had already prepared a stylish tracksuit, trainers, and a cap of delicate cream color. Valia went to bed early, and Romance walked around the room, thinking over his plan. Getting into his mistress's bag was the only thing he could do, so that was the way it was going to be. The morning burst into the flat with the sound of sparrows, the hum of sprinklers scaring away the first passers-by, and the ringing of the alarm clock. Valentina got up quickly and ran to prepare breakfast, scratching Romance behind his ear. I'm in a hurry. I'm sorry, she explained to him as she walked. You stay here alone. I'll be back late. But tomorrow, maybe we'll celebrate my promotion with you. Everything would have gone well, but only Valia at the end of her frantic packing accidentally locked Romance on the balcony. He meowed, scratching at the door, but the headphones kept the woman safely away from reality. Valia was a little surprised when Romance didn't come out to see her off in the hallway, but writing it all off to his temper and resentment, she calmly locked the front door and took the lift downstairs. Nikolai's car was already waiting at the entrance. Valia quickly got into the car, and they drove out of the yard. Romance was thrashing about on the balcony, looking for a way out. Glazed, hot, the balcony turned out to be a real trap. Soon the sun would heat it to an unbearable scorch, and the cat would be in trouble. But Romance wasn't thinking about himself. His mission to save Vali from something or someone had failed. Would he fail in his 9th and final mission? But then one of the windows gave in to the insistent pawing, moved aside. Romance, having cut his paws on the fine gravel of the path, fell down from the 7th floor and rushed after the car, encouraged by the shrieking sparrows. Now he had to rely on his internal navigator, intuition or something else that made the cat always make the right choice. A turn, another one, the open doors of the minibus, someone's feet in high rubber boots, the lively cackling of teenagers going for a swim, the grumpy shouts of the conductors. Romance huddled under the seat and lurched, waiting for his stop. As soon as something inside clicked, he jumped out into the street and ran straight into the forest. It was shorter that way. The house he was looking at wasn't far from town, and if he tried hard enough, Romance would be just in time for the evening. By his last night. Nikolai told about something, confidently driving the car in the stream. Vale liked his neat, and at the same time relaxed manner of driving, liked the smell of his cologne, how he threw sometimes quick glances in the rear-view mirror, and then he and Valentina met eyes. Nikolai, Kolenka, the only abandoned, resentful son, saw Valia's photo on the internet. On the company's website she was on the list of the best realtors. She was recommended by former clients with whom she made deals. And she also looked like Kolenkin's mother. He had never found such a resemblance. As if they were molded by the same sculptor, paying attention to every detail. That decided it all. The man looked at his passenger, chatting about how he would like to spend time with his friends in the fresh air, asking questions about Valia's family, wondering why she was still single. Valia blushed, quickly averted her eyes and fixed her fringes. You are such an interesting woman, Nikolai sang like a nightingale. It's immediately obvious. Oh, come on, Valia babbled. The most ordinary me. I have the most ordinary life. Well, I guess you do have admirers, don't you? Valia shrugged her shoulders. I don't have time to do that. I have to work, then go home late at night. One thought only to sleep. Valentina smiled embarrassedly. Although I have one loyal admirer, you're right. Yes? Nikolai hummed ambiguously, either upset or surprised. What's his name? Valia smiled. Romans. But then sirens wailed behind her. An ambulance rushed past, and Valia's words were drowned in those sounds. Roman? Nikolai wrinkled his nose as if tasting the word. Roman. It's all right, Roman. Now you don't have Valentina live in peace, and he couldn't live without her. In fact, he was born for this woman. The cat jumped over fallen trees, waded through thickets of raspberries, tore his fur and broke his paws in blood. But he did not give up. His heart was pounding frantically in his chest. His mouth was dry. But romance would not stop at the stream. Not now. The car pulled neatly into the gravel-filled courtyard. Nicholas got out and gallantly opened the door to Valentina. Well, let's go and see the house. Valia took the keys out of the bag and confidently walked along the path to the porch. Nikolai asked something, clarified, stroked the fresh wood, covered with light pine stain, walked around the rooms, now and then meeting his eyes with his traveling companion. All right, you wander around here, look at everything. Don't be in a hurry. I'll wait outside. Valia was somehow frightened by his intense, almost unblinking gaze, and hurried out into the street. A couple of minutes later he called her back. He wanted to check whether the air conditioners were working, or whether the electric fireplace was on. Valia obediently went in. Then everything happened too fast for the woman to be able to tell the investigators about it later. The man's grip was steely, cruel, unquestioning. Nikolai whispered something to his victim, dragging her across the lacquered floor. His trainers left ugly, gray streaks on the floor. Yes? So you've built a house? Where's mine? What do you mean? Valia struggled, but immediately felt a blow. They built a house on my place, do you hear me? This is my place, my house stood here and you broke it. You didn't want me to come back to you? Didn't wait for me? Did you think a new house would mean a new life? It won't work. You won't have a life. Shut up! Valia tried to scream, but his hand clamped her mouth tightly and roughly. He said something else. The woman only realized that there was a house on the plot of land that had once been bought for a building. 2 people lived in that house, the grief-stricken mother and Nicolasha. It was a difficult life for Nicholas. His mother did not like him, often went away and disappeared for several days, leaving her son alone in an empty, hungry house. Then Kolenka ran away, began to lead a licentious, robbery lifestyle, and decided to take revenge on his mother. He looked for her everywhere until he found a woman who looked like his mother. But each time there were doubts. The women somehow didn't recognize their Nicholas. And then the hunt began again. And you're my mother. I know it. You're my mother. You'll get what you deserve. Nikolai pulled a gun out of his rucksack and pointed it at Valentina. Valia desperately shook her head, urging Nikolai to come to his senses. She screamed. But for kilometers around there was no habitation. No one came here. The new house stood outcast in this world, as well as the owner of the land on which it was built. The muzzle of the gun was already staring into her forehead. A minute, 2, maybe half an hour, or an instant, and life would be cut short before she could take another breath. Valia obediently closed her eyes and settled to the floor. Nikolai smiled gloatingly. His mother, was now sitting in front of him, in his sick imagination, and begging for mercy. And he would not forgive, he would avenge himself. The movement of his fingers, the trigger smoothly went back, the shot rang out, and then Nikolai felt, as sharp, barbed claws dug into his neck, teeth tearing flesh. Romance made it. The last jump was incredible, unreal, but it was still there. The gun spat out a bullet, but its trajectory changed. The deadly lead hit the concrete of the fireplace, ricocheted off and burst into Nikolai's heart with a hot, indifferent mass. But before it did, the bullet passed through the cat clawing at the twitching man's chest. 2 hearts stopped in an instant. The blood froze, stopping its rhythmic run through the vessels. The last breath was torn out of the bodies. That was it. The last, 9th life lived. The task completed. Never before had Romans been held in his arms. Never had they looked into his eyes in his last moments. Usually mistresses left him in clinics crying goodbye. But not Valya. She crawled over to the small, crumpled body and covered it with her palms. She laid her head on the floor and stared into those green, sly eyes, stared until they faded, glazed and closed forever. I love you, darling. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her brain refused to accept all that had happened here, in this house, and her soul was washed with salty grief, unable to find consolation. Valya did not remember how she ended up in the hospital. Mild concussion, to be monitored. We'll see. Our psychologist will be in later. The investigators are coming in today too. The words came from somewhere far away, whether from shock or from the medication that was supposed to help Vala forget everything that had happened, but she couldn't. The images kept spinning and spinning in front of her, not allowing her to calm down. Sorry. I'm a hospital employee. A psychologist. A man peered cautiously into the room. He wasn't wearing a white coat, sabots, or any of the trappings of a doctor. Can I talk to you? Valya mumbled something, turning her back to the wall. Let's take it as a yes, confidently said the guest. My name is Roman Olegovich. I've brought you some caramels. Unfortunately, you can't have coffee yet, but you can throw them in your tea. It's probably delicious too. Valya sat up abruptly and stared at the man. Her head buzzed. The woman drowned in the green, cunning eyes of the hospital staff psychologist, and he carefully placed the tray with the treat on the table.